No, Malcolm, you got it all wrong. Make America great again, bro. Okay, like if you just work hard enough, you can be like those billionaires.
For you to amass that kind of wealth, it requires that you step on the poor. And that's something that infuriates the Lord. No human being that you come into contact with is ever your enemy. Ever. That we need an economy that doesn't just cater to greed, but is actually meant to meet human need.
How dare you come onto my podcast with the clipping microphone? Do you
I'm
know
sorry.
who I am? Do you know who I am?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
This is the benefit of meeting your guests in real person, in person, before you bring them on the show, because you can actually, I'm from New Jersey, Malcolm. Okay, I'm a sarcastic dude. In fact, you have a mutual friend, Paul Whitaker, Dr. Paul Whitaker. You're also a doctor too. All you guys have your doctorates. Doctor everyone. And me and Paul, we grew up in a very small town in New Jersey called New Egypt.
Okay.
That's an actual name for you historians out there. And Paul's kind of he's kind of his own flavor of person, but whenever him and I hang out, which isn't super often these days, but we kind of fall back into like our Jersey sarcasm rut, because us East Coast people, we love the sarcasm, we love the jabs.
It's true. Look, I'm an East Coaster too, because I grew up in Maryland, right outside of DC. So
see,
I know
get
what
me.
you're talking about.
Okay, but before people tune out, because no one likes banter, apparently, even though I love it and it's my show, but clicks and views and ad revenue and stuff. You wrote a book. That's why you're here, and I have I have the early advance copy, which is I'm finding out is like the Paupers edition compared to what you have. Yeah, you got the real copy. It's kind of in what did you say it was? It was kind of like the lettering is raised a little bit.
Yeah, it's like raised a little bit.
Yeah. Not mine. Mine's flat. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, the name of the book, The Anti-Greed Gospel, Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism and How the Church Can Create a New Way Forward. Now, listen, I got to be honest, Malcolm. I have been trying to pigeonhole you. I have been. I'm like, okay. Is Malcolm like one of these like both and moderate types? I've had a few of those on the podcast. I appreciate them, kind of. But then I saw that, once I saw Jemar Tisby give an endorsement, I'm like, shit, done. He's on the pod. I'm not even going to doubt him anymore, because Dr. Jemar Tisby endorsed this book. So
that's why I had Jemar do it specifically so I could get on this podcast.
Well, job well done. You're really playing 4D chess, honestly. So this subtext, why the love of money is the root of racism and how the church can create a new way forward. Obviously, I have so many questions, but let's just kind of start from the beginning. Go ahead and give the audience a very brief introduction to you, and then why you decided to write this book.
Yeah. So right now, work-wise, I'm special advisor to Baylor's president for equity and campus engagement. So essentially, all the work with the kind of diversity and equity stuff.
You can't say that anymore.
That's my purvieue.
Okay.
I know. I'm saying I'm putting all my business out there.
You really are.
I want people to understand. I want people to understand what's at stake in this conversation. But I also co-pastor a church in Waco too. But when I did my PhD at Baylor, I was focusing on Black Protestants responding to lynching in the late 19th and early 20th century. So I'm a historian of racial violence and Christianity, as well as a pastor and all that kind of stuff. And so all of those things have melded together to produce what in writing this book, I just kind of poured my soul into a book, but also in an effort to serve the church, because I think our most significant enemy is mammon or greed. So this is
no, Malcolm, you got it all wrong. Make America great again, bro. Okay, like, haven't you seen the news? White evangelicals in particular, they love money. They love it, and they love people who have a lot of money. And if you just work hard enough, Malcolm, you can be like those billionaires.
That's what neoliberal capitalism tells you.
Well, let's dig into this, because there's a lot of ways to go. I mean, go ahead and give the audience just kind of like the preface for the book. Like, what is the overarching theme here? Your claim is that greed is at the root of racism, right? Historically, how do you come to that conclusion? Give us the thesis.
Yeah. So basically, whenever I have a conversation about race, I want to begin with the question of what's so bad about racism.
Mm,
A lot of people will have a number of answers to that question. My argument is that race and racism do three things: they lie, they steal, and they kill.
mm,
And those are essentially the categories of that evil. It is at root a lie, but it's a lie for a particular reason. So I argue that race is part of what I'm calling a demonic cycle of self-interest. It begins with our desire to exploit and dominate each other. So basically, just to take advantage of one another and also to wield power over one another. But because as human beings we don't like being exploited or dominated, in order to keep someone in that position, you need to employ violence to do it. But also because most of us have consciences, we don't like to wake up and think, well, I'm really excited for a day of exploiting, dominating, and killing my neighbor.
mm.
So we create narratives in order to tell ourselves that that's not what we're doing to one another. And that's fundamentally the role that race has played for the last 500 years. It's been a set of narratives to allow people to tell themselves, hey, like, yes, I'm making a whole bunch of money off these people, but it's right for some reason, probably because of something in them, or something about the way that God created them in such a way that I should be able to make money off of them. So the easiest example of this is racialized chattel slavery. I have a
Right.
line in the book where I say that the Portuguese didn't get involved in chattel slavery because they were racist. They got involved because they had markets they wanted to expand.
Mm,
And then as they had to justify that wealth to themselves and to the Pope, they're like, well, these Africans are heathens and we're trying to Christianize them, or they're
mm.
savages and and it's our opportunity to civilize them. Like, yes, we're making a whole bunch of money, but disregard that. This is what we're really about: the spreading of the gospel, or just the spreading of Christian civilization. And that kind of narrative work is what lies at the root of race and racism. It's this that it primarily functions as justification of systems of economic exploitation.
There's a book by Scott Coley. He wrote a book called Ministers of Propaganda.
Yeah.
And he talks, and I'm blanking on the full phrase he uses, but essentially what he says is these are like they're like justification narratives that we tell
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. And he has a better word for it. But that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of what I heard you say in
Mm-hmm.
your way of like, essentially, your claim is, in this case, the Portuguese,
Yeah.
they didn't start off by being racist. They started off by saying we have to make more money. We want to expand our markets.
Yeah.
Oh, if we subjugate these people to slavery, that can do that, but we need a way to justify that it's okay. So we're helping them somehow, but we're also
Yeah.
making tons of money. And you're saying, I'm assuming in the book, that spirit of greed has, Jamar always says that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's been rhyming narratives throughout history that have essentially done the same exact thing in different ways. Is that kind of the general claim?
Yeah. Yeah, and the fact that I mean, and that's the history. That's particularly the history of race in America. So I draw it really tightly to especially the history of lynching, because people think about lynching as just, hey, there's just these mobs of angry racist white people killing black people. And one of the things that I want to frame historically is actually this begins because of money and it also ends because of money. And that as a historical argument then also launches us into thinking about, okay, well, if that's actually the narrative that binds all of these things together, then what does it mean to build communities that resist the evil that race and racism are actually pointing to?
Okay, pause there
That's
for a
what the
second
second half
then.
of the book is.
This is so fascinating. Let's dig into this. So,
Yeah.
you're right. When I think about lynchings and why people did it, the narrative I have in my head is that angry white people, many of them who went to church on Sundays,
Mm-hmm.
just hated black people and lynched many of them in sometimes very grotesque and brutal ways.
Yep.
But you're saying there's a financial incentive behind that led to those outcomes. Can you kind of help us, maybe unpack what those things are?
Yeah. So when you dig into a number of these cases, often they begin in like labor disputes. So for example, I narrate the lynching of Mary Turner in this book, which is one of the most, I mean, it's just one of the most brutal lynchings in American history. But it begins because a man named Sidney Johnson he's an employer who basically abuses his workers. One of his workers kills, or one of his workers kills him. It creates and as a result, the community kind of just does a manhunt for this guy and kills a bunch of black people in the kind of as quote unquote collateral damage. But it begins out of a labor dispute. And there are sociologists and others that have tracked the rise and fall of lynching to the rise and fall of cotton prices. And what it points to is the fact that what lynching actually was a tool of social control. As Ida B. Wells would say, it was a tool to quote unquote keep the Negro in their place. And what is that place but a place of exploitable thing? And not only is that why it starts and why it continues, but that's also why it ends. Lynching doesn't end because basically we because we figure out, wait a minute, we probably shouldn't set black men alive in front of crowds of thousands of people. No, it becomes a national embarrassment. So you get editorials coming out of France and Japan saying, what are these Americans? What are these Americans doing? They're barbarians burning people alive in public. And it starts to and especially as the South is starting to industrialize, it also reduces the amount of people willing to financially invest in the South. And so they're like, okay, well, let's find another way to suppress black communities. Let's dig deeper into Jim Crow legislation. Let's move this violence into the legal system, into capital punishment. So the death doesn't stop, but it just moves. And one of the things that I want to remind people of is that when you ask enough questions, when you follow the money, you find that that's actually the most important trail to follow.
What's the incentive? Okay, so you mentioned that, like, oh, well, we're not getting enough investments in the South, so let's move this to the legal system.
Yeah.
At some point, does racial resentment and hatred just become its own sustainable thing for the sake of people just being straight up racist who just hate black people? Is that why they move it instead of just ending it? Right? Because I would think, again, if it was economically viable, or if it made more sense to not light people on fire anymore, which great, glad to hear that. Why even move it to the legal system then? Why not just say, great, you know what, we learned our lesson. It's actually better if all of us have equal opportunity, because in a capitalistic society, you would think that breeds more innovation, right? Which breeds more businesses, which breeds a more free market, which means that consumers have more options and get to spend their money, and we all win. So like, what am I missing that would make someone go, nah, let's not do that. Yeah. Let's just keep subjugating black people in different ways that maybe go under the radar in the cultural moment, that then get read back throughout history, and we go, what were we thinking 55 years ago?
This is why I use the terminology of racial capitalism, because the scholars that also use that term are referring to the fact that the capitalism that we know is and has always been racial. That is, the capitalism that we know has always required that we place people in categories in order to exploit them. Because capitalism requires exploitation and expropriation, that is not just taking advantage of folks, but actually taking things from people. Because it requires those things, somebody needs to get stuff taken from them. and throughout that history, there has been we have always placed people in categories to also separate ourselves from them, and to tell ourselves we're the ones who can take, they're the ones from whom things ought to be taken. And so that is both the history of race and the history of capitalism. And the argument of folks like Cedric Robinson and others is that those those histories are the same.
What do you say to someone who would be like, listen, Malcolm, I get it. You're a historian, but that was then. Now we don't judge people by the color of their skin. Anyone can make it in America if they just work hard enough. Start a business, go to school, learn free stuff on YouTube and do whatever you want. Color of your skin doesn't matter anymore. This is a very predominant narrative, shocking, in like white spaces and white Christian spaces. And I grew up hearing it my whole life, right? The idea of like, guys, people who are complaining about inequality, they're not working hard enough. People who are poor, just again, they want to be lazy. They have a poor mindset, etc. How do you respond when people say that stuff?
I would really like to live in a world where race didn't matter. I'd love that. And one of the more I think one of the more controversial points of the book is that I press really hard that both race and racial identity are fundamentally lies, and that's going to be controversial to some people, especially some of my Afro-American brothers and sisters, because of how much because of how important, especially interracial solidarity and racial solidarity have been.
Right.
One of the things I want to press is that the reason that those categories exist, especially for Black communities, they come from a place of self-defense, and we ought never have needed to defend ourselves. What that indicates is a broader evil. So racial solidarity, insofar as it's a good, is a proximate good. It's not an ultimate. It's not an ultimate good. To the ones who say that race doesn't matter anymore, I mean, we can point to all kinds of disparities and things like that. But one of the things that I want to do in this book is actually undercut. I want to undercut all of that, because I want people to understand that what they're seeing around them is really a proxy war of a cosmic battle. So when Jesus in Matthew 6 says that you can't serve two masters, you'll either love one or hate the other, be devoted to one or despise the other. You can't serve both God and mammon. One of the things that I want them to see is that the history of race and racism and the particular modes of death that they see around them now, whether poverty, hunger, all those kinds of things, all of that comes down to greed. And if we get at that root, then we're going to deal with a number of these other consequences too. And so one of the things that I'm hoping, at least for folks who are kind of still refuse to see the racialization of our nation, I'm not going to go. There's plenty of other stuff that people can read about that, and there's lots of stuff that I would point them to. But I want to get to the actual root. That is, what does it mean for you to actually love your neighbor? And if you're going to love, so for example, in thinking about the narratives that we have about the poor, because this is another thing that I pressed there. Christ has called us on a number of occasions. When we care for and love the poor, we are to default to mercy, not to judgment. And one of the elements of neoliberal capitalism is that it tells us that the poor are poor because it's their fault. But what this history reminds us of is the fact that actually often the poor are in positions of poverty because they've been exploited, because employers refuse to pay living wages, because people are segregated in particular neighborhoods where industries are not encouraged to thrive. All of these kinds of elements. And so one of the things that I want to press with folks is that love is not just a matter of feeling a particular way about your neighbor, but it actually requires material investment and material commitment. And that also has to undergird all of our conversations about race and racism too.
When you hear the word meritocracy,
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was going to ask you for your reaction on that. I mean, it's a really big talking point, especially in right-wing spaces. I've been to America Fest. I've heard Charlie Kirk say it from the stage. Trump has said it. As of this recording, we're watching some of Trump's cabinet picks be confirmed in a big piece of language: meritocracy. We have to get away from DEI and go to meritocracy. As a Black scholar who studies Black history and wrote a book on how greed is the root of so much of this, what do you hear in the coded language of those statements?
Well, I mean, in there is also the assumption and the framing, because there's a self-justification there. So for a number of the billionaires saying these kinds of things, it's them also wanting to say about themselves, "Hey, I'm in this position because I'm awesome."
Right. Right. And you are not.
And you're not. But the other thing about particularly our mode of capitalism is that it includes the narrative of, you can get like me if you work as hard as I do.
Right.
When it's actually the fact that you don't get billions of dollars because of just hard work.
Right. Right.
You get billions of dollars from extraction. That's the only way that actually happens.
Right.
And one of the points that I'll come back to the meritocracy thing in a second. One of the things about not only that narrative but the ones who are pressing it is that it indicates that we live in a society that has baptized the desire to get rich.
Yep.
But we're told in 1 Timothy 6 that those who desire to get rich fall into a trap and a snare and all these kinds of things. And then the author says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And so it is very hard to undercut those narratives. But there's also the fact that, like, none of us, you can be, and this is just a statement about kind of failure and success. You can be responsible for, you can be utterly responsible for your own failure. You can never be utterly responsible for your own success.
Right.
It's just like there is that's just but we refuse to understand the fact that we live in a society where two people can make the same decisions, but if they're not in environments that actually reward those decisions in particular ways, you can have radically different outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when President Obama years ago said that, no one gets successful on their own. You didn't build the roads, you didn't build, and when at that time I was very conservative. I was young, listening to talk radio, and I'm listening to Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh blast him for this. I'm thinking, well, he's right though. Like, I didn't build the roads that I drive on. Yeah. I didn't build the house that I live in. I didn't build the businesses that give people money to spend money on hiring me and my family's contracting business. Like, we're all interconnected, and it's not just me on my own. There are other forces at play, and that did not seem woke or Marxist or crazy. It just seemed logical. Like, people do things. In fact, I mean, all the time I think about this, I'll walk into a huge store and I'm like, wow, at some point, people built this thing. They poured the foundation, they made the trusses, there was some factory that molded the steel so they can sell it. Like, there's thousands, maybe tens of thousands of hands that go into the store I'm in so I can buy clothing or a mattress or something like that, right? This is not uncommon. But in the worldview I was given as a white evangelical, I was given this framework of, like, if you as an individual just work hard enough, you will be successful. And frankly, I watched my dad quite literally break his back. I mean, as a construction guy, we lived a very modest middle-class life. We lived very comfortably. My parents are very, they're well off. They worked very hard, but my dad probably works more hours than most millionaires out there. And I'll tell you, he's not a millionaire. My dad worked, I watched my dad work 60, 80-hour weeks consecutively, probably more than what Elon Musk would work. He's not a billionaire. So there are other forces at play that impact, like you said, how much wealth or how much money someone can make, quote unquote, on their own, just on their own individual merit. The math doesn't math. Does that make sense?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And, and Musk's net worth has grown, billions of dollars over the course of the last few months. Right. Not because, like, he's been working really, really hard.
Right. Right. No, exactly. That's exactly right. I love how I love the laugh. Like it's just like, are you kidding me? Like we believe this. We really, but there are people who buy this shit. Yes, there are people who buy this shit.
I mean, because also, I mean, there's a part of me that's just like, just some amounts of money are just absolutely ridiculous.
Well,
and unreal.
Yeah. They're unreal. I don't think we understand a millionaire compared to just a 1 billionaire. Like that discrepancy, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny. I was at America Fest, this big right wing Christian nationalist rally. Yeah. I met a pastor there from Australia. Him and I we're debating on the floor, and I'm trying to explain to him that one of the questions I had for a lot of these people is I would say my line of question went like this. I would say, okay, you and I both agree, that we care about the middle class and the average worker. We want to see fair wages. You and I both agree that we don't like big corporate business in bed with the government to rig the rules for them. Yep. And we would both say yes. And I would say, okay, help me understand Elon Musk and Trump. Help me understand Vivek Ramaswamy and Trump, or Trump's billionaire cabinets, new cabinet full of billionaires. Do you think that these people have your best interest at heart? Do you think that they care about livable wages for their workers? And I swear to you, Malcolm, on many occasions, the response I got was, well, I trust Elon to do the right thing. Like Elon, he doesn't need any more money. And I'm like, do you not know how billionaires function? All they want to do is they're a vacuum. They are a money-sucking vacuum. And all they care about is extracting more and more wealth at the expense of other people. And then I was told by this pastor,
stay in that position. Yeah.
I said, dude, greed's a sin. Like the Bible is super clear on this, right? And he goes, well, I've met poor people who are greedy. And then my brain actually broke. My brain, you literally saw it. My body language, my head cocked to the left, like, what? Like, I'm sorry. How can a poor person, by definition, is just trying to survive? They're not. Greedy would mean that they have more than they need. By definition, a poor person does not have that, right? They're trying to survive in a late stage capitalistic nightmare. They're in debt to their eyeballs. They're trying to get money to pay their bills. Yeah. A billionaire is not thinking about that way. Right.
I'll say this, and
he could not comprehend it.
It's funny that someone says that as a dodge, because I mean, I think just from the nature of sin, sure, a poor person can be greedy, but that's not where your focus. That's not where Jesus's focus is, and it's not where our focus ought to be. The scriptures regularly come after the rich, and Christians don't do that. Which is like that, like that's another thing that incites this book for me. I want to remind people of of how negative the scripture's words about the rich actually are, particularly in the New Testament. Because one of the things that's pressed constantly is that for you to amass that kind of wealth, it requires that you step on the poor. And that's something that makes the Lord, it's something that infuriates the Lord. And so I have a reflection on Jesus' conversation with the rich young ruler.
I'm just laughing. I'm sorry, can I interrupt you? Because we're friendly. I'm laughing because every time I bring that story up, well, it just applied to him. I'm like, what? Like, what?
Here's the thing. What? Look, I got you. So in and I do this in the book that throughout Western interpretation, the main thing that comes out of people's interpretation of that passage, and I look at Clement, I look at Augustine and some others, is that the issue with this guy is that he thought about his wealth in the wrong way. Clement will say, he didn't actually do any, like Jesus loved him. He didn't actually do anything wrong. He was just thinking about his wealth the wrong way. But I follow Basil of Caesarea's interpretation, which is that when he laid out all the commandments to the rich young ruler, the failure of this man was a failure to love his neighbor as himself, because possessing that much is a lack of love for your neighbor. Basil has that has this line: the more you abound in wealth, the more you lack in love.
Oof.
Because for him, it's like, look, you have all of that, and there are hungry people around you. That ought not sit well in your spirit.
Right.
You ought not be spending all this time trying to amass for yourself when you've got people who don't have homes around you, who don't have food around you. That ought to be the primary focus of your heart. Chrysostom will say on other occasions, the only reason why the Lord sees fit to give us more than we need is for us to share with those who need it. And that's the way that I want us to frame our relationship with all of our resources. And one of the things I want to press in the book is that Christian communities ought to be communities where that logic is at their root. We don't see that. We don't see that in most church contexts, but that's precisely what we're supposed to be.
Hi friends, if you're enjoying this video, I have a favor to ask. The New Evangelicals is a 501c3 nonprofit, and if you've looked around at all, you've probably noticed that we don't offer member subscriptions on YouTube or Patreon options. The reason for this is very simple. It's been our mission since the beginning to offer all of our content and community resources completely paywall free. What this means is that we are completely dependent on the generosity of people like you who donate to make this work possible and accessible for all. If our content has helped you, would you consider donating to keep it all going? You can find the link in the description of this video, and to be very clear, this is not about giving to God or something like that. We're not a church and this is not a tithe. The ask is so simple. If our work has helped you, would you be willing to help us make this content accessible to more and more people? All donations made in the US are tax deductible and every bit helps. Thank you for your generosity. Well, okay, this brings up a whole host of questions, and we have time, so let's explore them. This is almost kind of like a myth-busting episode of like, here's the myth, and then you kind of bust it with a hammer, right? And it is, I will say, it's fascinating watch. I mean, one of my favorite verses to quote the Bible is clear crowd is James 5. I'm like, yo, you want Marxism in the Bible? Like James 5, baby. Like the author of James is like, woe to you rich people who are exploiting your workers for unfair profit. The day of judgment is coming. You're fattening yourself up like a calf going to slaughter. Woo, my boy.
That's what he said.
Right?
That's what he said.
And then what's interesting is watching evangelicals in particular either just straight up ignore that or justify it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not what you think. And then the big thing, it's a heart issue, Tim. It's what your heart. I'm like, guys, why are you this way with this, but not with other topics that you think are so clear that the Bible speaks on, which I would argue are not clear for good reasons. Anyway, so the other myth I want to kind of knock out of the park here while I have you, is this idea of, well, Tim, if you want to give away all of your possessions, go ahead. Like you live, hey, you live in America, the world's richest country. You're rich by the world standards. And I'm like, listen, I don't always have the language of trying to say, I'm just trying to survive, right? I'm trying to make a modest living for my family. We give away what we can, but like, I can't give a straw off my back because I'll be then freezing in the cold. So when people say that, I'm sure you've heard that argument before, like they always say, well, like, give me the line. How much money is too much money? How do you respond to that kind of narrative? And is that, I don't know, is that based on some kind of historical racist narrative as well? Like, I don't know. For all I know, it could be. But I hear this all the time.
Yeah. So, well, my thing is also to press that, like, greed is primal. Race is historically contingent and just a piece of this broader story. As to the selling of your possessions thing, the response to, well, that was just Jesus's word to the rich young ruler, is that in Luke 12:33, Jesus says the same thing to the crowd. He says, "Sell your possessions and give to the poor." And he says that to everybody. And when he says, "Store up treasures in heaven," like, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about making material investment in the poor. So that's how. So it's not just now. The only distinction with the rich young ruler is that the rich young ruler is told to sell all of his stuff. the Christian is supposed to make but it is supposed to be a regular habit of the Christian life that they're in material solidarity with the poor. So that's one element. That's one element of it. Sorry, I want to go back to the other part of your question, but I forgot it.
Oh, it was when people say, "Well, Tim, then sell all your stuff." Like, then why don't you go ahead and do it? You know?
Okay. So here's another point, because I think we also don't ask ourselves the question, what do I need? I've done this, like I do this thought experiment with my church, where I'm like, okay, what amount of money would you need to basically have everything that you could need for the rest of your life? And if you got that amount of money, would you be comfortable just like stopping? Just be like, I've got enough. I'm done. And a lot of people like respond kind of with confusion, because they've never thought in those terms before. Like, you just think about, like, if I have an opportunity to make more, then I'll keep doing that. And so part of it is also, I mean, we tend to not have a real relationship with contentment. I mean, like, we read Paul say, you know, if we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. And we're like, I mean,
no iPhone, Paul? Like, really, bro?
Like really,
no,
bro?
No 55-inch TV. They're super cheap. They're
like,
super cheap.
Yeah. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
And that's you know, I don't want this to turn into like just this kind of a lifestyle nitpicking. What I want it to do, though, I want us to ask, like, this is one of, I think, the most important pastoral care questions that can be asked, is what is it that you actually, resource-wise, what is it that you actually need? And how are you building into your life habits of particularly relationship with the needy, such that you recognize that you have things that other people need and other people have things that you need. That's the only way that we build relationships of mutual interdependence in a world that constantly encourages us to just be like, self-sufficiency is the goal. Be able to live this life on your own, because that's what life is really, really about. You making it on your own. And that's just not, I mean, that's not the life that Christ has called us to.
Man, okay, so here's the problems I have, though. Like, let me go to play devil's advocate here, because let me just say, I agree with you. Like, I mean, I on its face, I agree. A couple things. I think one of the reasons why people, at least in America, I'm sure globally, you know, have a hard time answering that question of, well, how much would you need to be content? It's because everything is so volatile. You know, I don't know the cost of my healthcare next year. I don't know how much college will be by the time my kids turn 18. I don't know how expensive a car will be or a house will be, et cetera. Right. So it's hard to predict that. It's just hard, period. Right. And maybe, maybe a cool 35 million. I don't know. but like, for real, I just don't know. I think that's one reason. And number two, I get kind of caught in my head a lot, because if I'm walking the streets of Philly and there's someone who is unhoused and is hungry, like, do I have a moral Jesus obligation to feed every single person that I come across on my way to meet with a friend for coffee? And I'm not trying to sound trivial. These are just real questions that I grapple with, because I very much am a pragmatic person. Like, at the end of the day, the theology is fun. The conversations are fun. The history is helpful. What do I do now? Like, what do my hands do to enact this heaven on earth mentality? And the other big problem I see is that, and this is one of the I think that this is by far the hardest. The spirit of the age, we can say, is so hyper individualistic. I mean, in the Western world, it's already individualistic. America is even farther. There's a great book by a guy named Randy Richards called Misreading Scripture Through Western Eyes. Amazing book. And he really picks up how the Bible and the world of the Bible is an Eastern culture. And they think very differently than how people like you and I are taught to think in America. And so I love the idea of, Shane Claiborne in his book, Irresistible Revolution, talks about like an economy of exchanging service for service, right? Tim, you're really good with tech. I'm really good with plumbing. We can trade services, right? I love that. I do. Like, I'm all about it. But I wouldn't even know the first place to start to even do those things, because friends of mine who are contractors would much rather prefer that I pay them money to pay their mortgage and take care of their kids than I fix their router. You know, that isn't like an agreed upon thing because we need money. So this is kind of, I think, a big part of the book that we should hit on before we kind of, start landing this thing. But give me some on the boots on the ground scenarios of like how we fight against the spirit of the age that seems like it is such a tsunami. And last thing I'll say about this, then I'll give the floor to you. The worst part of this for me, is that white Protestant Christians and some Catholics are the biggest supporter of the people who worship mammon at the expense of all their neighbors. And I do think that Trump and Elon and like the white evangelical, like sycophant nature of those people and celebrating all the good that they do, it really fuels that fire of like, not only Christians are you not reading your own text at all, but you're totally trading the truth for a lie, as St. Paul says, right? You're totally giving up your soul to gain the world. And you think that you're a biblical, God-fearing, Jesus-loving Christian, and to put it in their own language, you think at the end of the day, Jesus will say, "Well done, thy good and faithful servant." I mean, you really think that, right? Yeah. So we have a whole other issue that's its own universe that we cover of the white Protestant problem in America that is fueling so much of this, with the church industry to boot. Okay, the floor is yours. You have 2 minutes. Can you answer all that for me? Well, I'll give you three.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to say in the book is that, I want people to see the beast of neoliberal racialized capitalism. But I also want people to understand that like you're not going to overthrow it because what we're up against are demons.
Wait, clarify that, because demons in our context means liberals. So I don't think you don't mean, well, I'm serious, because people, right, Christian nationalists use that language. The left is demonic. When you say demons, what are you actually talking about here?
So what I mean is when Paul in Ephesians talks about we do not wrestle with flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and spiritual forces in the heavenly places. What I mean is, and this is what I say in my chapters on nonviolence, no human being that you come into contact with is ever your enemy, ever. Even if they want to kill you, they're not your enemy. And even if you want to call them, your enemy, your responsibility to your enemies, according to the scriptures, is when they're hungry to feed them, and when they're thirsty to give them something to drink. If you want to know who your enemies really are, it's sin, death, and the devil. And as Jesus will say in Matthew 6, mammon or riches. So if you really want to know who the enemies are, and you want the scriptures to tell you who those enemies are, that's what the scriptures say. And so one of the things that, and this is why the subtitle of the book is the subtitle that it is, how the church can create a new way forward, is that I believe that particularly Christian churches are meant to be alternative social, economic, and political entities. Like what we have the opportunity to do is show the world that there's another way, that there's another way of living. We have an opportunity to actually build communities without need. This is what happens in Acts 2. After the Spirit descends on the people of God, they're marked by four things. They're marked by devotion to the apostles' teaching, prayer, the breaking of bread, and the fellowship. Koinonia is the sharing of goods. It's a community without need, because whenever the needy enter into that community, the community rallies around them. And that is a fulfillment of Deuteronomy 15, where God sets up this economy for the people of God and tells them, look, if you do the things I tell you to do, there won't be any poor people in your midst, because I'm organizing you in such a way that you live these deep relationships of solidarity so that people don't have any need.
Sounds pretty communist to me.
Well, hey, look. And I say this in the book too, because I am a Christian socialist.
But no,
yeah, I know.
Oh my God, you just said it. Oh my God. Audience, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was a socialist. I'm so sorry.
But one of the things that I want to press is that, like, look, it's not because of Marx. It's because of
Right.
it's because of the scriptures. Yes, Marx. I mean, Marx is right about capitalism on all these kinds of things, but Marx does not have a monopoly on socialist or communalist economies.
Say it.
As a matter of fact, Cedric Robinson in his book Anthropology of Marxism lays out the fact that actually you've got Christian communities building communalist economies before Marx is even thought about, because there's this fundamental understanding that we need an economy that doesn't just cater to greed, but is actually meant to meet human need.
Right.
And that's what I want. I'm not aiming for, and I say this in the book, I'm not aiming for a state-run economy. That's not what I want. What I want is for us to live in a state of affairs where people have the things that they need to be able to flourish.
Right.
That's what I want, and that's what we all ought to want. But the world that we live in is one that actually just says, "Hey, you have the opportunity to get rich, so go do that."
Right. Yeah.
And disregard the fact that you're gonna have to step on people on the way. Just don't worry about them. What matters is that you get yours.
Yep. No, you're completely right. It is funny. The more I go down this path, the more I'm like, why are we so afraid of Marx again? Like, why is this a boogeyman word? I mean, honestly, MLK was a communist, and yeah. Okay. Like, well, what is that? What do these things actually believe, though? Like what is the spirit that animates an allergic reaction to the word Marxism, but embraces capitalism, right? I think that's an even deeper level that so many of us have to unpack. And one of my goals is to get like an actual Marxist professor on the show, just to kind of give us the skinny, like, hey, like, dude, what does Marx actually believe? What does he teach? And then we can go from there.
Are afraid of. So I know what people are afraid of. So what people are, one of the things that people are afraid of is the fact that, Marx frames history in such a way that capitalism will be violently overthrown by the workers to enthrone this new political economy. And so to be a Marxist is to be essentially a backer of violent revolution. And the thing is, like, when you're rich and also in power,
right,
that's an active threat. Like that's right. An active threat to you.
Right. Right. Never mind the violence of capitalism, right?
No, exactly.
That's just accepted.
No. I just prefer that you just just suffer in silence.
Well, exactly. And this actually brings up a very important question that I really wrestle through. This is me just being completely straight up with you.
Please.
Where do you see the call of the Christian between fighting for the general good via government versus these churches, right? And here's the thing. I am all about, I believe in the church. I think the church is the hope of the world in so many ways. Not the evangelical thing we mapped onto it, but the church itself. This idea of a gathering of the believer to worship God, love their neighbor. No one has any need. In fact, one of the books that radicalized me back in the day, before I even deconstructed, was called Pagan Christianity by Frank Viola.
Yeah,
I'm reading this book. I'm like, it's all pagan. Like, oh my God, like burn the whole thing down, right? Everything in the church is gross. No paid staff, no nothing. And honestly, in so many ways, I still believe that. Like, I do think that these mega church budgets of millions of dollars in staff costs takes away from the actual mission of the church to love the widow, the poor, the orphan among them, right? Yeah. So I still believe that. I still have some of that from me, some of those beliefs in my psyche.
Yeah.
But if affordable healthcare isn't a reality for every American, right? It doesn't matter how many churches try to do something to pay their rent. I mean, that's not bad, of course, but it doesn't really fix the systemic issue. And I think what I'm waking up to is, in my cultural tradition, Christian tradition, everything was solved by individualism and piety. More charity, right? Well, we just need to make sure that we have more birthing centers that give people diapers, etc. But when it came to the systemic nature of, well, maybe the reason a person needs charity is because they can't get access to affordable wages or to healthcare, right? As a Christian, and I'm sure historically as well, you can speak to this, how do you see the role of someone like me or you or people listening to actively advocate for government policies that would promote the common good for all of our neighbors, on top of building like these individual churches that build these little micro communities?
Right. Well, we also now have significant. Well, and I say this now. We'll see what happens after the inauguration. But we currently have significantly more political power than, for example, Paul did in the Roman Empire.
Right.
Right. For now.
Right. Yeah. Right. Caveat for now.
for now.
This might not age well at the end of the year, but until then, for now.
I know, right? But all that's also to say, I mean, we then have a responsibility to use that power that we have for the common good. But I also want us to understand that any broad political victories that we might have on behalf of the poor and the needy and the oppressed and the widow and the orphan and the immigrant is going to be it will likely be a fleeting and temporary one, because we're in the midst of an empire, and empires do what empires do. And three of the things, this is the book of this is the book of Revelation. You've got the beast from the earth, the beast of the sea, and the woman Babylon, and what those indicate are
Did you say the woman of Babylon?
The whore.
Yeah.
The whore.
No. I appreciate. I just want to say I appreciate
the woman,
that. Yes,
but the woman Babylon.
Yes.
That's what,
a lady of the night of Babylon.
Yes,
you know?
right, exactly.
Yeah.
But what those indicate are three necessary elements of empire: military might, economic wealth and exploitation, and a really strong propaganda machine. Like those are those are the necessary elements of empire. And they're just at root the logic of evil. Evil needs stories to tell about itself. It needs force, and it needs money. That's what and there was a line at the when we were at Notre Dame. I forgot who said this. But that you can mass radicalize people, but you can't mass de-radicalize people.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
who was that? It was a good line though.
I think it was Elizabeth Newman. But what that indicated to me is that, like, evil can work at scale, and we can't really. And that's not a necessarily bad. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just kind of that's just the state of affairs. It's also the way that Jesus, like, it's also the way that the incarnation works. Like, he didn't overthrow the Roman Empire by out dominating the empire. He did it by dying and by creating these insurgent communities. And so I want us, insofar as we have, like I said, whatever political power we have, the only reason why we have it is specifically for the uplift of the needy. That's the primary reason why we have it. But I also don't want us to place our hope in those things, because we're going to come against significant obstacles, and those obstacles are going to get, especially over the course of the next few years, like, those obstacles are going to be more and more apparent now. Like, I mean, we were in a world where billionaires just ruled kind of from the back. Now they're in the front.
I know. Yeah. And Christians are like, yay, America! You know, like, yeah. I mean, does that? Listen, I am not a historian. Okay, let me just preface: I'm a former homeschooler, some college person under my belt. Okay, that's my level of education. But through this work, I've been able to meet amazing people like yourself, Jamar Tisby, and many others, historians. And I've read, quite a few books. I mean, J. Russell Hawkins' book, The Bible Told Them So. Wow, blew my mind, right? Like, just the history of how much of a talking point and a focus maintaining segregation was for the average white Protestant evangelical type person, right? So going back to the beginning of this conversation, we talked about how history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And I'm wondering, reading the moment that we're in now, do you totally see the continuation of a white evangelical infrastructure and system that is still maintaining the very things that it maintained in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, etc., but just with new language, right? Again, with new narratives that end up justifying the same types of outcomes. Do you still see that happening today, or do you see like a major shift?
To go back to the book of Revelation, Jesus gives introductions to 7 different churches. And I'm preaching his greeting to Laodicea on Sunday, and I think that there's no indication now that the temptations of Laodicea are going to die. That is the temptation to think that you and for Laodicea, it's you're lukewarm because you're rich and you think you have no need. And I think that one of the elements of the white evangelicalism that is apostate because of its devotion to whiteness, power, and money. There is a sense in which, I mean, it needs to die, but it will likely be, those are impulses that will likely remain until Jesus returns. So we have an opportunity, and in many ways, I think a mandate to be able to show even those communities that a life of actual obedience to Christ, a life of actual solidarity with the poor and stuff like that, that is actually a way of more joy, more power, more peace, all of those kinds of things. To show people that domination and exploitation are not that's not the way of the cross.
Well, I agree. I had Jamar Tisby in here, first episode of 2025. And him and I are friends. We talk often. Yeah, and the thesis was why you should leave your church in 2025. And I got to be honest, again, like you're looking at someone, Malcolm, who was formed by the white evangelical machine and did it all the right way. You name it, I did it. Planted the churches, led worship, saved myself for marriage, read all the Bible studies, read all the books, did missions work, did parachurch ministry. I did it all. And and part of what I used to do when I started TNE, one of the things I would always say on Saturday nights was I would give a little message of encouragement. I would say, hey, if you're still serving in your evangelical church and you're really wrestling through the theology, maybe the Christian nationalism, but you're not sure what to do with it, serve well because you're committed to doing it. And just know that we have people on the outside rooting for you to change things on the inside. And I said that for I hope podcast people watch this on YouTube so they can see your face. Yeah. But that's what I would say. And it was my way of saying, I've been there. I've been in tension. I see you. And change happens from the out and from the in. But I stopped saying that this year because as I've been reading and watching and kind of keeping my finger on the pulse of what animates and what gets white evangelicals really riled up and what they completely ignore. Yeah. I don't say this for shock value or for the sake of sounding radical or trying to earn the cool points. That's not me. But I really do not believe that there is anything that is unique that makes the white evangelical church worth saving at this point. Like you can find community outside of white evangelical church spaces. You can find great Bible teaching and great leaders outside of white evangelical church teaching. You can find great music outside of the white evangelical worship church, everything, right? You can find that stuff in other church expressions, the Black church tradition, Latinx church tradition, the mainline. You can find that stuff. Yeah. And I just am at the point in my life where I'm like, the SBC, Southern Baptist Convention, was founded over the right to own other people. That's in the DNA to this day. Yep. Like this idea of moral superiority, who we can own, who we can conquer. Yep. I just don't see any justifiable reason for white people who are trying to rethink their faith to then stay in the same toxic soup, that they've been in. I mean, and by the way, just to be clear, to my audience, my solution for you is not go find a white progressive church. It's go find a black church and go sit in it. Just sit. Just show up and listen, right? Get new wineskins. So I say all this just to kind of get your reaction to it, because I am so beyond the point where I'm like, yeah, guys, maybe we can save some of this stuff. No, it's in America. It is we would not have MAGA without white evangelicals. That's just data. That's hard data. We wouldn't have MAGA. We wouldn't have the right-wing media ecosystem. We wouldn't have people like Elon Musk as popular as they are. We wouldn't have any of that if white evangelicals and white Protestants weren't some of the biggest supporters of that whole world of ideology.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I can say it because it's on my podcast, but I really want you to be unfiltered here. Like, give me your thoughts on this and how you see the next 15, 20, 30 years of church developing, because I think we're in deep shit, frankly.
Yeah, no, I'm inclined to agree. Like I said, I mean, I think I speak and think the way that I do because my co-pastor and I planted the church that we lead, and we came out of the PCA, and I have told that story, but that story is going to be a chapter of a book that'll come out, I think next year, where I tell more of that story. But yeah, I mean, when a denomination begins, particularly in greed and racism, as for example the SBC, and as a number of the southern denominations that started in the late 19th century, when it begins in that kind of rot, unless you address that rot, it's like gangrene will kill. It's just death. You become walking death. And you as an individual are not going to fight back that death. Sorry, like let's just say sorry. But I think it's really important for people to be able to discern what is of the Lord and what isn't. So over the course a few months before the election, one of the elders of my church asked me who I thought was going to win. And I was like, I'm pretty sure Trump's going to win. And I said, I'm pretty sure Trump's going to win, and it's going to be a test. It's going to be a test for the church. It's going to be a test to see who is going to be on the side of essentially sympathy and complicity in empire, and who are going to be the people who are overwhelmed by the vision. And that's Revelation again. Who are overwhelmed by the vision of God on the throne in Revelation 4, and are like, that's the only kingdom. That's the kingdom that matters. I'm going to seek first that kingdom and God and God's righteousness, and all the things that I need are going to be added to me. There's going to be that book. It's apocalyptic literature, so there's a lot. Right. There's a lot there. Right. But there is a stark there's a stark question of allegiance. Who is it that you are going to be fundamentally allied to? Are you going to be fundamentally allied to Christ and the way of Christ, and particularly the way of the Christ, and particularly the way of the cross, or are you going to fall into or are you going to fall in line in the ways of empire? And my hope is that what this does is that exposes that starkly, so people can see it clearly and make those decisions clearly. Because one of the things that at least the last 8 years have done for a lot of people is they have revealed what their deepest commitments are. This is one of the reasons why I sit in the lynching era, because the profound brutality of it reveals who people really are. And one of the things that the last 10 years have done is they have revealed who people really are. And so now that revelation has happened, it's time for people to start making the kinds of decisions of, okay, well, what are the communities that we actually have to build? What are the communities that we actually have to invest in? And especially with the risk of rising authoritarianism and stuff like that, like that, those questions are going to become more and more salient as the days go by. So I just want people to get ready.
I'm with you, man. I'm with you all the way. It's going to be a long 4 years, maybe even longer. So I think it's really important that we keep, working together and just having these conversations and also giving people practical next steps, which I think is so important. So the book is The Anti-Greed Gospel, Why the Love of Money is the Root of Racism and How the Church Can Create a New Way Forward. When's the book drop?
Drops February 11th.
That should be out. Right up on maybe around this time when the podcast drops. So make sure, friends, that you pick it up and read it. I mean, this is really, look, the more you know, the more you can fight back against what's happening, and the more you actually have the ears to hear coded language. One of the biggest things for me was after reading Jamar and many others, Kristen Dumais and Matthew Taylor, etc., I was like, oh, when Charlie Kirk says something, I know what he's referencing. So it really is helpful, I think, to have the historical context that, frankly, white evangelicalism just refuses to either tell people or doesn't know itself, right? Yeah. So, Dr. Malcolm Foley, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Where can folks find you if they want to maybe track your work, or do you have a public presence? Plug all of your stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm on Twitter right now.
Oh, thoughts and prayers. Jeez.
I know. It likely won't be for much longer. But it's Malcolm B. Foley there. It's Malcolm B. Foley on Blue Sky as well. It's at rev.malc on Instagram. But yeah, I mean, my main thing right now is pre-order the book if this comes out before the book comes out, or just order it. But also, I hope that it also encourages you to, to build, like I said, to build new kinds of communities and to ask different questions, not only of the people around you, but also of yourself. So
I'm all about it. Well, thanks, my friend, for being here. We'll talk again soon.